Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Erin Majerowitz, and I will be your host for this NASA Technology Transfer Program webinar on NASA's Active Pointing Monitor for a two-axis optical control system. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to note that this session will be recorded and your microphones will be muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box that can be found in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We will answer your questions during the Q&A session at the end. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Irving Linares. Dr. Linares is a design lead and lead engineer for advanced flight and ground technology and spaceflight instruments development at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. His research interests include spaceflight electronics, digital signal processing, digital image processing, lossless and lossy data, and image compression, HDTV, UHDTV, JPEG, MPEG, and MATLAB, Simulink RT development. His current NASA projects include precision formation flying and lunar search and rescue. He supported NASA's strategic planning and concept definition studies for many national and international proposals, and is an inventor on 3 patents. Following Dr. Linares' presentation, Mr. Eric McGill will be giving a brief talk on how NASA licenses technology to outside organizations. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Linares.
Thank you very much. May get this thing moving. So the topic today has to do with an internal research and development project that we usually have before a big mission is flown. So there, as you may surmise, there are many elements to going to satellite, from propulsion to communications to the actual science that needs to be performed. So this particular investigation had to do with the stabilization of the imaging for a spectrometer. And after searching for many technologies, the design team decided that this was a very promising technology, and we just spent about a year developing it. And we came up with two test sets, one using MATLAB, and then we move into Simulink, hoping to have a real-time response that would represent a real flight system. So as mentioned, these are my interests. And I'd like to mention that the principal investigator for this study or development was Dr. Antonio Mannino at Goddard Space Flight Center. And I had the pleasure to work with 3 other co-inventors, James Smith, Kathy Marks, and Peter Shue. There are some acronyms in the presentation, so I'd like to mention them just that you're aware of what we're trying to describe. As you may know, NASA is well known for a number of long acronyms and too many of them, so we just mention a few. The purpose of this discussion is the CODI mission or instrument, and that stands for Coastal Ecosystems Dynamic Imager. We were part of the Earth Observing System proposals. We were trying to propose to that large system. We use fast steering mirrors in the development, and the CODI was going to be part of the GeoCape mission, which is a geostationary coastal and air pollution events. We use a Teledyne detector, and we eventually, after we were in the process of proposing, NASA headquarters decided that there were other priorities, and there was a mission that was previously approved, the PACE mission, which is I think it's ready to flight. which is plankton, aerosols, clouds, and ocean ecosystem. So as you look at these two descriptions, the GeoCape and the PACE, you say, well, they basically look at coastal processes, the sea and the oceans and so forth. But the big difference is that GeoCape was going to be geostationary, while PACE is low Earth orbit, like 250 miles, like close to the space station orbit. So for certain administrative issues and priorities, we were not able to continue the development of this mission, but all what we develop is available for technology, further technology development. So that's the purpose of this presentation, to let you know what we did. And if anyone is interested, NASA will be very glad to work with you. Important things that we're going to talk here. We basically did a proportional integral differential controller in the discrete time domain. So we're going to mention some of that. And there's something called here TRL, which is NASA Technology Readiness Level. NASA has levels 1 through 9. Level 1 is concept. Level 2 is some sort of better defined system with equations and some scientific background. Level 3 is the first prototype, and you progress through different levels. Level 7 is flight-like. We test that with in baking chambers and vibration tables and so forth. And level 9 is flight. It's something that is already flying in space. So we took an idea which was a level 2, and we were able to bring it up to level 3, and that's where we stopped. And the purpose of this spectrometer was to look into a whole bunch of electromagnetic spectra, from the ultraviolet to the infrared. So those are the acronyms that we'll probably be mentioning as we move forward. So agenda is the introduction, some requirements for both the mission and the instrument. We'll spend some time in the lab prototypes, offer results, suggest some applications, go to the conclusion, reference point of contact, and questions and answers. So the first chart about requirements. GeoCape was going to look at the ocean color and track riverine estuarine plumes, tides, fronts, and eddies. It's just he want to look at the coastal processes from 23,000 miles in geosynchronous orbit. The benefit of doing this is that you could do short time measurements. When you're at low Earth orbit, you can't do that. You have to wait until the satellite comes back at some other time. If you are at geo orbit, you could do this every couple of minutes, potentially. So you would have a very useful time resolution in the minutes, and you would have very high spatial resolution, which was another purpose of this mission. So we're going to look at life cycles of the algae blooms. We're going to look at carbon cycle for climate change impact, look at sediments, pollution, hazards like oil spills, and models for ecosystems and water quality and water model forecasting. All those things could have been done with this satellite. These are better defined requirements. We had a threshold requirements and baseline or goal requirements. So let's spend a few minutes about the baseline or goals. We wanted a temporal resolution of half an hour, and we wanted a spatial resolution of 200 meters by 200 meter pixels. Currently, pixels are about 1 kilometer square, so this would have been 4 times better resolution. And the high spectral bands we were looking at went from 340 nanometers to up to 2,135 nanometers. Scan rate, we wanted 50 kilometers square per minute. Spectral resolution, depending on demand, was 0.75 nanometers or 20 to 50 nanometers. We wanted a high signal to noise ratio. And the thing that we really spent a lot of time in my group was ensuring very good pointing stability. And we wanted to do 1/10 of a pixel. So if anything moved, we should correct and bring it back to within 1/10 of a pixel. And this, at the bottom of this chart, there is an equivalence. And we wanted to have plus or minus 1 Earth second to translate to that half a pixel control from geosynchronous instruments. The CODI requirements. CODI was going to be one of the various instruments that the mission, GeoCape mission, was planned. And it, as we mentioned, was going to be a high spectral instrument for coastal ocean color science. And the requirement came from the National Research Council's 2007 Earth Science Decadal Survey. This is something that NASA does every 10 years, and scientists from various universities and government organizations propose missions. So this was one of the missions that was proposed by the NRC. The main feature for GeoCape was going to be the geosynchronous orbit. CODI by itself wanted to minimize the temporal and spatial errors in data, meaning minimizing jitter, which is tip and tilt, and raw distortions. And we wanted to do that on board, not on the ground after we got the data. So we wanted to measure the distortion, correct it in flight, and then send the data down to ground via the downlink. So we would have studied the coastal oceans where physical and biological and chemical processes react in short time scales. That's what we wanted to measure. So this is a cartoon of the whole system. One thing that is, the feature of this proposal is that we had a laser beam coexisting with the aperture observation. So we were frequency division multiplexing a beacon of a specific wavelength and mixing it with the observation in whatever band we were observing. We made sure that that beacon did not interfere with the other lower or higher wavelengths. So it was like a specific channel. And the thing is, when this train of, I hope that you can see the pointer, the whole thing moved, the beacon moved with it. So if this mirror here, the 330 millimeter aperture, moved for any reason, the scan view along with the reference beacon would have moved by the same amount. So the whole train of optical elements went through the collimation, depolarization, focusing, and then through a fast steering meter. the fast emitter was connected to a closed loop controller. So we measured the distortion of the signal, and then we corrected with negative feedback using the fast emitter. So at that point, the distortion was minimized, and then it was sent through the dichroic meters, and then split into two redundant sites of the instrument, two spectrometers, two detectors, and so forth. So we have a near-infrared and a visible near-infrared bands, and the same on the right-hand side. And all this was connected by electronics that sampled the image and send it back through the feedback loop. The next diagram, it's another view of the previous one, but it's one side of the instrument, not both redundant sides. So here is shown the input on the left side, the cross-track ground scene image, and the particular alignment wavelength that we were using was 1064 nanometers. It was, frequency division multiplexed, sending to the fast emitter a number of optical elements, reflectors, lenses, and so forth. And it was projected into the 2K by 2K Teledyne detector. On the 3/4 of the detector were dedicated to the spectrometer array. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the 1064 column. So any distortion, tilt that could have been registered was detected at this particular 1064 column. That's the alignment beacon. And that's the sampling that we use for measurement and correction. This is another cartoon that shows that in a train of lenses, you will have relative motion due to the spacecraft movement being caused by temperature gradients, reaction wheels, thrusters, solar panel movement. All those things induce some sort of distortion, and that it's integrated into the focal plane observation. So at that particular column, two things could change if we're only looking at two axes. We have that beam projected into the column on the lower left cartoon part where it says centroid movement. So if you move up and down this beam, the centroid projected into the column will move up and down proportionally. If the beam moves left to right or right to left, the length of the projection will change accordingly. And you could have both centroid and length changes. And so the length and the centroid would move simultaneously. So that's the signal we were looking for, and that's what we use to drive the closed loop controller. This is a more detailed view of that effect. It's useful to look at let's take the tip motion centroid moves, the left-hand side, upper side of the chart. So this projection that looks vertical is rotated 90 degrees clockwise at the bottom. So if you look at this thing here, you turn it 90 degrees and make it horizontal. That's the projection that you're looking at the bottom. So each one has a related projection at the bottom. So the left side shows changes in centroid. The length of the projection stay the same. The centroid moves a number of pixels. The center one, the tilt motion, the beam moves laterally on the detector, but at the column observation, what you see is a change in length, but not centroid. And the right-hand side shows when both change centroid and length. So those were our input parameters. This is an observation which is related to the previous one, directly related to figure 1B. This is what we observed in the lab while using MATLAB. The left-hand side, figure 2A, shows the tip axis motion. I think this was a low frequency signal, like 2 hertz or 4 hertz, when we were doing this. So we were, moving the centroid, gently, just for display purposes. And that's how it looked on the line. We had a camera called E2V line camera, which was a camera with only one row of pixels. I think it was 1,024 pixels. So that's how it looked when displayed as an oscilloscope where time goes from the top to the bottom. On the right-hand side, you have a change in the length, which is related to the tilt axis. And here, the centroid doesn't change, but the length does change. And this was, again, like a 4 hertz signal. The lower image shows the correction of the system. It basically took, in the upper left-hand side, we were talking about plus or minus 50 pixels from the centroid set point. It corrected to less than 2 pixels. So the image shown at the bottom, it's a corrected tip excitation by probably like the error was diminished to about 2 pixels. The same if we took the upper tilt distortion and apply the correction algorithm, we obtain a similar, very stable performance of the pointing algorithm, less than 2 pixels. So we said, okay, what about roll? How can we measure roll, and how could we correct so that we have a 3-dimensional correction system? So for that, you need 2 beams, not only one. And by having 2 similar beams, you could measure the change in centroid and length of the projection for both beams. And by looking at those changes, you could determine the roll. So in this cartoon, what you see as equal lengths is just the initial state. If you roll to the left, the length of the projection is longer at the upper beam, while the length of the projection at the bottom is shorter. If you go to the right, is vice versa. So by looking at the ratios, length ratios of beam A versus beam B, you could measure the roll. So we incorporated that to the second model. The first one was just MATLAB, and we had a number of analog cards and video cards and so forth, but we didn't have a roll system. In the second model, where we use Simulink real time, we did have the third axis working and controlled. So this is a description of how we went into the three-axis closed-loop control system, and these are the components that we had. We had a high-power LED source. We have a green light fiber, 200 micrometers. We had a stepper motor with a bifurcated signal, so we were projecting two beams versus one. And then we have a corrective fast steering meter and an independent distortion meter, which would simulate the jitter that we were trying to correct. And that portion was driven by a National Instrument USB 6211 generator. And that created the distortion that this guy corrected in real time. We had a Thorlabs APT motor controller, and to move the stepper motor here, and then we were using the E2B 2K, so it was a 2044 pixels line scan camera, and the whole thing was controlled by the model in the SpeedGoat, and we had some Windows 7. At that time, this was about 2015 when we were doing this. We had MATLAB and Simulink and the host PC to create the model and download to the SpeedGoat and run it. This chart at the top left shows the SpeedGoat screen capture, which is shown in more detail at this slide. So the things we were looking at was, for instance, the length of the first signal and the centroid of the first signal. Also, we were also looking at the length of the second signal and the centroid of the second signal. And if you look at this little upper image here, this is the bifurcated projection into the line camera. And this is how it was shown as a function of time in the SpeedGoat screen capture. And this data, if you take a line across this optical illustration, you get two spikes. These are the length and centroid producing signals. In this case, if you look at certain height or threshold, you measure the width of the pulses at this threshold, and you measure the peaks at those at the base at the top of the pulses. So those two things would the L1C1 was associated with tip. The L2C2 was associated with tilt, and the relative height of these two peaks produced the roll angle. So we were able to measure the roll angle with this system, the three values. So I'm going to just quickly show some more screens. This is the setup. We'll do that after this one, I'm sorry. This is a quick view of the hardware we were using. The step motor, the fast steering meters, the line camera and lenses, they're here. Another view of the projection of the laser beam into the camera. And on the right-hand side, just a quick look at the hardware we're using for this demo, which was Simulink based. If we pursue further discussion, there is a model that we can share with interested parties, and there's more work to be done, but this was the what we were able to achieve in the time we had available to us. This is the lab setup with a whole bunch of different elements listed on the right-hand side. We have stepper motors, LED drivers, fast steering motor, driver electronics, speed code outputs, and so forth, motor controllers, and a whole bunch of wires interconnecting the system. So coming back to where we were trying to do, we just were looking into a proportional integral differential controller for our system when continuous time is described by this equation here, U of t. Can also be described by the Laplace transform of this equation. And the whole goal was to find the sweet spot of a critically damped system. This is what we would like. We would want to avoid overdamp or underdamp, but I think we were able to get something close between the critically and underdamped case, as you will see in a few charts from this one. So what we're going to show here is the length 1 excitation and response, the centroid 1 excitation and response to 100 millivolt step excitation, and for set point, roll set point, and step excitation, we're going to see the response of the roll angle, and also we're going to have simultaneous tip and tilt, and another graph showing the roll response. So this is the first case. I'm going to point to what is called here scope 7, which is where the action is in these examples. So in this case, we had a step function with a pulse width of 50%, which is this, what is called the value signal with a set point at a value here. So we couldn't figure out what these spikes were, but we went ahead, forged ahead without thinking too much about it. There was some sort of negative feedback spike in this thing. It should have been a completely square wave. But we forged ahead, and we didn't have a lot of time to do all the corrections that we wanted to do. So this is excitation, and this is what we get when we use the constants for the PID equation for a length, for like the constant for the proportional length was 1.5, the proportional constant for the integral part was 1.1, and the proportional part for the differential was 5. So there's a certain suggestion on how to do this, and there are some references that we could follow. We basically did it by hand, following that optimization manual process, but there are many more better ways of doing this. So, but this worked for our demo purposes. So if we did that with these constants, we got a settling time of about 1.2 seconds. If we tweak those constants in this example, if you compare this one on chart 21 to chart 22, slide number 22, we got a faster response of 0.8 seconds. But the the trade-off is the spikes are probably larger in the second time. It's a trade-off between settling time and how much the system oscillates. So in this example, this is what we were able to do. So we studied a number of samples. In this case, we changed the constants for those values shown there. And so we got a 0.5 selling time for the centroid signal. But you can see the oscillation got a little bit wider. And then there's, of course, a case where you are too greedy and the system becomes unstable. So this is just to show that, there are some limits on how much the PID controller can perform. This is the response of the roll stepper motor that we were using. So we had a set point of 0.5 degrees, and it was an initial value of 0. And so when we applied the step, the system went down in a spike, which was a negative feedback signal, and then it corrected to the set point. We didn't have any filtering or stabilization additional algorithms for this stage of the development, but that's something that can be done. So you can smooth out this signal by adding the proper filtering, which would be the integral part of the PID equation. But it suffice to say that we were able to get the roll axis working. This example here shows both tip and tilt excitation, and the yellow line is the response of the system. So the excitation, the error signal injected is the orange line, and the yellow signal is the response of the controller tracking the excitation. So for the length, which is called N1 set point, this is what we get. For the centroid, we get a smaller distortion because centroid is a little more stable than the length when we did this experiment. So that's reasonable. But it was shown that the system could track the excitation and correct for it. In order to do this, we needed to do some transfer functions for the motor controller. So this is just part of the development, and the chart shows that care feeding that was needed. And as a snapshot of what we did, we were trying to do a difference equation for this particular controller, which is a PID controller in this format U of K. And there's a description of the terms. So we mimicked that textbook process with these equations. The first one is for the length system. This is the difference equation we used. The second one is for the centroid controller. And the third one is for the roll controller, which all of them look similar. They need different constants as shown in this example here. These were the suboptimal values that we got for the constants for the length, centroid, and roll controllers. This can be optimized. We just didn't have time to pursue that during the time allowed for this investigation. What can we do with this? So the idea is to perform spectral peak deblurring. We just want to have sharp peaks in this spectral data that we get. We don't want sort of blurred peaks that wouldn't give you the science that you need. So that was the main purpose. So any satellite or spectrometer that needs to deblur the peaks due to jitter could benefit from this application. So this in the second case is real-time imaging. The first one is spectral peak deblurring. You can extend this system for imaging deep blurring in order to minimize ground or customer post-processing. This would work for any electromagnetic range, range that we are interested in, UV, visible, or infrared. The thing is that we would need sort of two detectors. One array will picture the image, and the other would have a, this is one way of doing it, this is the way I think we should do it, would be the stabilization beacon, the 1064 nanometer signal that we use. So if that thing moves, the whole image is moved, and so you can correct because you know how much it tipped or tilt. Where you have imaging cameras and spectrometers which require like less than half a pixel stabilization, we aim at 1/10 of a pixel stabilization. You could probably use this system. Another thing that could be done is you have multiple satellites which are making a mosaic image and they're flight information. You could have two levels of control. First is the formation flying orbit control. You want these satellites to fly at a fixed distance while circling the Earth or Mars, whatever planet you're pointing at. And so that's the first level of stabilization. Then each one would need its own optical train control, the whole assembly of lenses and meters and detectors. So this could be part of that. Another typical application could be drones, manned aerial systems, where you want image haptic control for stabilization. There is a trade-off of how big you can make the system. What we did was a lab model. I'm sure you can do this with one card once you spend the time developing the system. But the idea was to demo the concept. So a drone could probably have a small card with this electronics and perform pointing control. Another thing is you have an autonomous vehicle. Let's say you want to have a rover that is going to go into a dangerous area where there's some pollution or gases or something that the humans shouldn't go. And it's a rocky area, so there's going to be moving all around. This is just myself making some assumptions of how this could be done. So the images would be all over the place. You need to stabilize them. This could be done for that kind of environment. So what we were able to achieve in this exercise, first, we demonstrated that the line of sight and metrology system, this active pointing system, worked through a combination of hardware and software. And we increased the maturity from level 2 to level 3, which was a modest goal, but necessary one. We were able to show that for the cadence acquisition time for the proposed mission between 1.1 to 10 hertz, we could achieve the stabilization goals for that rate. We observed that the time constants for the fast steering meters and the step motors and so forth was in the seconds range. They're sort of massive in relation to the optics, so that was to be expected. Of course, we would like better, probably close to the hundreds of milliseconds or even, tens of milliseconds response. We weren't able to get there because of the mass and the inertia of the system. And another problem we had shown here is problems with the BitFlow frame grabber. What we got from the vendor, MathWorks and SpeedGoat vendors, which provide the modeling software, is a frame grabber that we couldn't configure to faster than 30 frames per second. That was a big limitation. And time was up, and we weren't able to increase that rate. That was a major drawback, but we did what we could with 30 frames per second, which is slow. We were able to push this system to 2 kilohertz, but we're getting repeated data because the camera was running at 30 hertz. So that's something that would be necessary for further moving this hardware, which would be lighter and smaller components, so that they respond fast to the mechanical feedback signals. We found that Simulink RT was very good for validating what we wanted to do. And of course, we were able to achieve the goal of demonstrating one of the components that would have been needed for the mission. So that was good, and that's something that can be used for future missions or for some commercialization of this technology. The effort was well spent. It's available, and we want to let you know that that's the goal of this presentation. There are some references referring to the mission, the instrument, and the patent that describe this system in more detail are shown here as references. Points of contact: myself, Sean Sullivan, and Eric McGill, which both will be talking soon to you, are points of contact for this technology.
Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Take care.